Thanks, Bill. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I know there's been a lot of celebration about the fact that we got the AOE to, we've convinced them to adopt the NFHS guidance. Yes, last week's meeting went really well on Tuesday. They told us that they would let us know this week, and I got an email from Secretary French the next day saying that they had adopted things and there wasn't any adjustments to what we proposed, which was a real success. And now we have this new guidance, and I think it's important that we look at the new guidance and realize that the new guidance is not a mandate, but a document that shows what we can do now, and that we became the aerosol experts in our schools when we found out about how COVID was spread back in the spring and over the summer, and thanks to the NFHS study. And now we indeed have to become HVAC experts as well. There's a lot of questions that you folks want to have answered. And how do we make this work? Can we make this work in our schools? Not everybody's going to be able to, and we understand that. And we're hoping today to really shine some light on what this all means, and to support you in any way we possibly can. To that end, maybe Bill, if you could just share the new guidance that we have, so we can just go over that real quick with everybody. That'd be great. If everybody could make sure that their mic is muted, that would be fantastic. So if we go, the general considerations here, I think, I'm stating some pretty obvious stuff here because I think everybody knows these now, but 6x6 spacing for all instrumentalists and singers, 9x6 for trombones. James will talk a little bit more. Dr. Weaver's here with us today, and he'll talk more about the specifics on this. We'll talk about the masking that we're recommending, including the type of masks that are being recommended. We're going to try to shed some light on the air exchanges per hour. I think that's probably the biggest question mark most of us have now. We are being asked to hold our rehearsals to 30 minutes in length, and how can we get creative on that? There were some questions about humming and the like, and we're going to ask those later. Wind instruments should not be shared at this point, and percussion instruments should be cleaned after every use. And we don't know about live performances later in the year, but we know that right now they're asking that we don't do any live performances for audience, but rather stream everything. You're going to see these fancy GB-T32610 standard. That is, and Dr. Weaver has shone some light on that. That is basically the cheap Walmart mask. I like to say, think about Bernie and the mittens. That's the mask he's wearing. That's a pretty easy way to remember. All of these studies were done with using that standard mask. So that's really the only mask we have data on. Dr. Weaver will talk about that. So that's what those fancy numbers are. Bell covers with MERV 13 are the standard as well. Talk about that. So I've been in touch with 3 or 4 of the suppliers of these bell covers around the state, the major ones, who are all getting that stuff in stock and ready to roll that out. I think people understand what your needs are at this point. So that's the major guidance. But one of the pieces that I really want to share with everybody is that we convinced the AOE to accept the NFHS guidelines. And the reason we did that was that those guidelines may change. They may get tighter, or they may get looser depending on the pandemic. And as they change, so does our guidance. So we don't have to come back every time we want or need something new in the guidance. So that was a big, I think it was really smart on their part. And Dr. Weaver counseled us to ask that. So without any further ado, first of all, I want to say a huge thanks to Dr. James Weaver from the National Federation of High Schools for coming on board. He met with us several times before we had our meeting. He was at the meeting, and this guy is a rock star. He answered. The thing that was so great was that the doctors were really tough at that meeting, but they asked tough questions, but they didn't ask follow-up questions. And because of the answers they got from Dr. Weaver being so complete, I think that's one of the reasons why we're so successful. So on behalf of all of Vermont, let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Weaver. We're going to have him present. We're going to have Nick Allen talk about how he navigated his particular HVAC system. And then we're going to open it up for questions. And then Molly Tobin is going to speak at the end about the C19 art and where we go from here. And I can say, I think it's our feeling that maybe the easy part of our advocacy has been accomplished here. The next phase of what we need to do as a Vermont music education community, I think is going to be a far bigger task with a much less sort of distinct goal, you know what I mean, in terms of like getting this guidance accepted. That was the kind of the easy thing. So please stick around for that and consider being part of that, because that's huge for all of us. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Weaver.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric. And it's good to be virtually in Vermont right now. I've been in Vermont once, and I'm very excited to go back at some point when the pandemic is all over. And I'm glad I could be a small part in helping you guys with the success you had with your departments at the state level, and get back in some music education normalcy as it is during a pandemic. I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to go through kind of the aerosol study in a nutshell. And it should answer, and hopefully, a lot of your questions. If you have questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and follow those. I know Bill or Eric, someone's going to be following the chat. So we get a lot of questions on the same thing. They're going to start my presentation. We'll answer those questions so we can move on. So that way they're not burning a hole in your pocket as we move forward. I'm very excited where you guys are heading. You're going to get into a space where a lot of the country is right now. And with that, you have a lot of other people who have done what you're about to do in music education throughout the country. So if you need help or resources, Eric has a direct line to my contact area. Let him know, let your team know, and we'll make sure we get whatever resources you may need from around the country. So here we go, aerosol in the performing arts and what we're going to do about it. Real quick, I work with the National Federation of State High School Associations. You know, I won't go through the whole thing, but we are just an organization that's been around for 100 years, and I describe it to music groups as the largest organization you've never heard of. We do a whole lot of things in the background and help administrators do all their things, and then hopefully that helps you in the music field do all of the things you need to do. This is how we are broken down. You guys are in section 1, and with that, your section representative is from the state of Connecticut. And so if you need anything from there also, Eric, just let me know and we'll make sure you guys get connected. The study chairs is myself and Dr. Mark Speed. He's my partner in crime on this whole thing. He actually had the idea to study aerosols back in early April. We knew that something wasn't right with what was being transmitted. He did a huge deep dive and read like 300 articles over a weekend and said, I'm pretty sure this is airborne and it's being transmitted by aerosols. How do we know this? So he reached out to a few of us and I was like, hey, Mark, let's go ahead and do this. My organization had the organizational capacity to make it happen. And so we teamed up and we formulated a coalition of 125 national and international organizations to help make this thing go. These are our 4 lead funders. Just a little bit of background for those of you who don't know. The aerosol study is a gigantic study. It started off as a price tag of $37,000 and has ballooned to a price tag of over $320,000. We raised all those funds monthly within 22 days. Never want to do that again. But we have these 4 as our lead funders. We have all of these contributing organizations to fill in the gap, which is no small feat. There's no such thing as a small contributor to this project. And then we have conferences that went in and individual band associations, and we have other supporting organizations that helped us in other ways that may not have been financial. I say all of that so everyone has an idea of the scale and scope that this thing has consumed in life. And it really is the most comprehensive study so far on aerosol production in performing arts classrooms. Our 2 lead researchers are very impressive people in their own right. Dr. Shelley Miller, who's on the left, she's our lead researcher from the University of Boulder in Colorado, or University of Colorado Boulder, excuse me. She investigates urban air quality and works diligently to understand the impact of air pollution on public health and the environment. She's an expert in indoor environmental air quality, including airborne infectious disease transmission and how to control that transmission, as well as air cleaning technologies. Dr. Miller is a member of the Academy of Fellows for the International Society of Indoor Air and Climate, which is the standard bearer for indoor air and climate. And then she also co-authored a chapter on indoor air quality in the Environmental Engineering Handbook, which is what all environmental engineering people use to create the standards. Dr. Schrebrink, who's on our right, is from the University of Maryland. She's an expert in measurements and multi-scale modeling of built infrastructure to provide reliable assessments of how these systems affect occupant respiratory health, building energy consumption, and associated CO2 emissions. She's taught and developed courses at the University of Maryland, Penn State, and Harvard. She's presented more than 30 guest lectures at Stanford, Princeton, MIT, and Columbia. She's also a member with Dr. Miller in the International Society of Air and Indoor Quality and Climate. So these two are very impressive people, both nationally and internationally, so we're very fortunate to have them. Rounding out our research team, on the Colorado side, we have Professor Gene Hertzberg and Abhishek Kumar, who are flow visualization specialists. We have Dr. Samir Patel and Taya Stockman, who are APS specialists. Professor Darren Tui is a experimental design specialist, and Dr. Marina Vance is a masking specialist. On the University of Maryland side, we have Nicholas Matisse, Sebastian Romo, Lingxing Wan, and Dr. Xingzhang Zhu, and they are the people who do all of the modeling components based off the study data we get from University of Colorado Boulder. They imitate, they try to recreate the same study, and then they put it in all these big computer models. And then we also have a guest person who's not listed on here, but Dr. Don Milton, who is a live virus specialist, and he helps us determine how things are really being spread and using that information to guide what we're doing in the aerosol work. So one thing we want to look at when we look at aerosols is we're not testing live virus in our study, because then we'd be talking millions of dollars worth of study. What we're doing is we know how the virus transmits through aerosol particles. We know the size of particles they can be carried on. We know the size of particles they're most infectious on. So that's what we study, in the size and how to stop those size particles from being transmitted. So if we look at the trumpet here, this gray bar is the average of particles being generated by experiment designs, and with no bell cover, so just open play, no mitigation. The bracketed bar you see here is the top, the top and the bottom ends of how much aerosols we find. The orange yellowish color is a mitigated play with the dual layer high denier fabric with the MERV 13 material in the middle. And then you'll see this little one right here. We decided to just take one of those blue surgical masks that Eric mentioned earlier and rubber band it on the bell just to see what happened. And it dropped it down to near 0, because these are 80% effective at a 2.5 particle size. And then you can see what we have for the rest of the instruments here. Notice Tobin and euphonium don't really have a lot of particles coming out of them once we put a bell cover on. They have giant bores, and gravity is our friend, right? So as the particles are being blown through, because the bore is so wide, gravity is able to pull a lot of them back down after they hit the bell cover. So we're not seeing a lot of spewing aerosols with a bell cover on tuba and euphonium. We get here to the woodwinds, and you'll see that this scale over here on the left has changed. It is much bigger. Oboe is the biggest offender for aerosol particle generation. So those of you who are oboists, I apologize. I don't mean to throw you out under the bus, but it is what it is. Now, we didn't think this was going to be the case when we started. We really thought the flute was going to be the biggest offender when we started this whole process. Well, if you look at the flute dynamics, though, there's hardly anything there. So we had to figure out why this is the case, and we figured out that you have to have a wet vibrating surface in order to create respiratory aerosols. So as a human being, when you're breathing, you have large respiratory droplets, which I'm sure by now everyone is used to that term. What happens in aerosol, those large respiratory droplets will go out about 0.5 meter to 1 meter from you and then fall to the ground through gravity. So they have a limited spread. So 1 meter is around 3 feet. So we say 6 feet distance to make sure that you're well beyond that 3-foot size. What happens in aerosol, though, is those wet vibrating surfaces will take the large respiratory droplet and break it up into a smaller size that can then hang in the air longer because it's not as controlled by gravity. So the oboe has 2 wet vibrating surfaces as a double reed, and it really is efficient at chopping them up and then spewing them into the environment. Now you notice the bassoon is not the same as the oboe, and that's because we have the long crook and a really long way out. And so gravity helps us in the bassoon, not so much in the oboe. Now with the flute has no wet vibrating surface, right? You're just blowing over the hole in the head joint and away it goes. So your large respiratory particles or droplets stay intact and fall to the ground quicker. They're also a lot easier to mitigate. So we have a recommendation of having the blue surgical mask, sliding the head joint under the blue surgical mask and playing that way. Is it inconvenient and not comfortable? Yes. However, are you able to play? Yes. That mask is really efficient at stopping large respiratory droplets. So without the aerosol, it's a lot easier to mitigate. Does that make sense for everybody? I can see most of you, so if you just give me a head nod, that'd be great. Perfect. I like presenting where I see so many faces, because so many times I present and I just see black empty boxes. So it's nice to see people's reactions to things. I miss presenting in person. Okay, so moving on. So then we get into singers, right? And we see here our soprano singer is producing more than a baritone singer. This is physics, right? So the higher the pitch, the more vibration you have in your vocal cords, the more you're breaking your large respiratory droplets into aerosols and spewing them in the environment. The lower your voice, the less vibration of your vocal cords, the less you're doing. We can see the same trend in every instrument category too. So you can tell which ones are higher and lower based on how many particles they're producing in the aerosol. Same thing here. You'll see here these orange and yellowish ones. These are using this mask, which has the, this is the one you can buy at the store of your choice. And it has the standard of GBT 32610 that is on your Vermont guidance document put together by VMEA. Another standard you could use the F2100 standard. That's the American ASTM standard. The GB standard is the Chinese standard. The reason why we have that standard out there is because it's easier to get because of the manufacturing capabilities that China ramped up quicker than what the US ramped up. But we are starting to see US masks that are made. So if you want to buy American, great. Use the ASTM F2100 standard, and that'll get you the same standard as this one. So one thing we want to look at when we look at mitigation effectiveness is a couple things, right? Because when I show you the next slide, you're going to say, well, saxophone really isn't that mitigated as well as, say, soprano singing. So I'm going to use this as an example. So the saxophone, if you remember that bar graph we just looked at, has an aerosol release of 0.7 parts per cubic centimeter with unmitigated. When you put the bell cover on, it drops it down to 0.32 parts per cubic centimeter. So that's a 64% reduction, but we're bringing it down really far. In the oboe, it says a 96% reduction, but we're starting at 4 parts per cubic centimeter and bringing it down to a half part per cubic centimeter. Those last two are near background levels. So we want to try to get the background levels about 0.25 parts per cubic centimeter. So we're close to that. We're getting near background level. It is unrealistic to expect us to eliminate all aerosols from playing because we as human beings emit them just by being alive. So this is what the efficacy is, and this brings all of these efficacy ratings are bringing it down to around background level. And if you look at this, they just go basically right in order of lowest offender to highest offender as far as the amount of aerosols we bring in. And then the higher they offend, the more effective the mitigations are because there's more aerosols to stop. Okay. So let's kind of look through what this APS data looks like real quick. So here is APS data for the trumpet. No bell cover. We tried pantyhose. The reason why we tried a pantyhose bell cover is one, super easy to get and cheap. And on our flow visualization experiments from July, it looked effective because it really did stop the flow of particles coming out of that instrument. However, it did not necessarily stop and made it a little bit worse, it did not stop the aerosols from coming out of that. You'll notice in our second and third release, we talk about MERV 13 material because we're like, okay, so we're stopping the airflow, which is good, but we're not stopping the aerosol. So we added a MERV 13 filter material to it because that was also easy to get and you can buy it in bulk. An example is I bought a 20 square foot bag of MERV 13 filter material on Amazon, and at that time it was $16. I think now the same bag goes for $20 because more people are buying it. So capitalism, it's doing its thing. But that was supposed to be a joke. You guys can smile or laugh at that. So what happened when we created the bell cover, same pantyhose material, just adding the MERV 13 material between the two layers of pantyhose, and it drops it down to this level. Now, there's all sorts of great materials you can use today. This is what we had to use back in August because there's great materials that you can get from, you know, Gator, Conselmer, all the people who are making those bell covers now. You know, those things didn't exist when we were doing these experimental designs. So we found we can really reduce it down quite a bit. Then this is reading without a mask at a soft voice. Now you see here we have a bell cover that's playing no bell cover, but it looks pretty low. This is a very low dynamic that we're playing at. When we bell covered it, you can see this is the same passage, much lower because of the same shape of the APS data. Now, like we can actually tell the high C on this. We can tell when a trumpet player plays a high C because they produce way more aerosols than when they play an open B flat. Then we have a background bell cover, and then we did the surgical mask, which really reduces it down. And you see the same trends exist here, right? Bell cover, no bell cover, and then we tried a spandex cover because of those there, not nearly as effective. Here's our flute data. You see how small this axis is over here. In fact, if you look at it, our playing is actually lower aerosol than the actual background of the room. and then definitely less than reading. We're going to go into singing, same sort of trend, no mask, mask, no mask, mask, read, no mask, and here we go. Now, one thing we did find, and this is true for every instrument as well as singing, and I'm going to show you this in the clarinet, is the longer you play, the more aerosols you produce, whether you play or sing. We don't know why that's the case. We just know that it happens. A couple of things we're thinking is, does the instrument collect more condensation as it plays and it has more particles to create aerosol from? Does your body, while singing that long, have a natural response to create more respiratory droplets in order to compensate for the stress you're putting your body under while singing and playing? We don't know those answers. We just know that once you play past 30 minutes, you start producing more aerosol. We just don't know exactly why that's the case yet. So anybody out here who'd like to jump into some research, that'd be great. But we don't know why. And you can see it really easily here, right? So here's clarinet, no bell cover and reading, about the same. No bell cover, background, about the same. After 60 minutes, here's we really triple the amount of aerosol we've been putting out with no bell cover. But 10 minutes later, we're still able to mitigate that down to about background level. So mitigation wise, it's still there. We really want to make sure that we're watching the amount of time because of that. And then we looked at, I get questions all the time about, well, should we use bags for woodwind instruments because of all the keyholes? So we studied this. So here, right here is the bell uncovered with the bell and the keyholes in a box. And then we covered the bell and had the keyhole in a box, and we see our normal drop in the amount of aerosols produced. Then we have the bell covered still, but with the bell and just the bell only in the box. Let's see the difference. And then here we have the bell covered and the keyhole in a box, and then bell uncovered and keyhole in a box, and we shoot right back up. We flip it, where we have, here we're sampling near the bell with the bell uncovered. Here we sample near the keys with the bell uncovered. Here is sampled near the keys with the bell covered. So we are seeing a little bit of particles come back up the keyholes, but still not enough to raise concern. We're still near background level. Plus, the other thing we're doing is this is a laboratory experiment, so we're measuring the keyholes all open, where we know that when we play, we're going to have fingers over the keyholes that are blocking it. Not all of them are going to be open, some will be closed. So really not seeing a lot of aerosols coming back up out of the keyholes. That's good news, because now you don't need to use the bags, right?
Dr. Weaver, can I just, a couple of questions popped up in the chat. Jim Clayback asked if background level is basically, what's referred to as background level is basically the same thing as a normal classroom with people speaking.
No, actually that would have more aerosol in it. This is a background level is people existing in a room, right? So just breathing in a room, that's background level. And we're bringing our aerosol emissions to what we call near background level. So it's still higher than background level because you're still doing aerosolization activity, but we're bringing it down to a pretty low level.
Great. And then Jeffrey G asked, it looked like singing through a mask was worse than without. Maybe that was just a misunderstanding of that a visual.
No. You definitely want to sing with a mask.
Okay.
So here's without a mask, and here's with a mask. So you definitely want to sing with a mask. Okay.
And then Heather Truder asked, when you say that we create more aerosols after 30 minutes, does that mean that you can't stop singing in one location, move to another, and continue? Or I guess maybe it says maybe that you can stop singing in one location, move to another, and continue singing and playing. What about humming combined with the 30 minutes of playing or singing?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that here in a second. One thing that with the humming is you're still producing stuff, right? So when we talk 30 minutes, we're really talking the expellation of aerosols over the course of time, because you got to think of aerosol transmission as the Peanuts character that had all the dust going around in the Pigpen guy, right? That's how aerosols exist around our world. You just can't get away from that. So after 30 minutes, we know that even with a mask, because we don't believe in like proper masking in the United States. So we know that a well-fit mask, people are not wearing. So we're going with a better fit mask, right? Where we're saying that they're well fitted on the cheeks and on the nose and on the bottom, but they're not like the N95 perfect fit. And because we know that, we know we're going to have aerosols escaping from the mitigations that we're using, because we know that we don't use masks to 100% effectiveness. And so that's why we have that 30-minute time limit. When it comes to humming, you're still producing those particles, right? You're just not producing as much of them because you're not opening your mouth. But you'd also be hard pressed to say that, all right, so as I hum, I'm never going to open my mouth, take a breath in after that, right? So you're still exhaling those aerosol particles. We don't know to what extent you can combine two different activities, such as humming and singing. We haven't gotten that far in the process yet. But it is something that you just want to be cognizant of, right? These risk mitigation factors are designed to reduce the risk to you and your students. And you can cheat around them as much as you want, but you're still going to be producing particles. You're still going to have to look at your time and your ventilation and on those kinds of things. So even though these are just guidelines, you still need to think of what kind of risk level you're going to be willing to take, because we are not able to say there's zero risk to anything we do. You can't say that walking out your front door, right? So what we're trying to do is say, using all these mitigations, masking, reduced time, increased ventilation, proper hand hygiene, bell covers, all those things, that we can reduce the risk to a acceptable level, if that makes sense. Yes, and then flute and the recorder are actually identical. It's just a different kind of mask you'd want to use, right? So, okay. So let's kind of walk through this. This is what I'll show. This is one reason why we are shooting for that 30-minute time limit as well. So this is some great modeling. This is actually a model done by the University of Maryland of the University of Colorado Boulder's facilities. Ignore this red guy, number 4, pretend he's blue. We got over ambitious with the model we were trying to do. So this person number 1 here, oopsies, don't look at that yet. Person number 1 is our infected person. This is all the real life data of the wall of the room, the hall that we're in. So here we have a room that's 12.5 meters by 9 meters high by 9.5 meters wide. And then here we have all the stuff we have about the people in there. So this quanta person, this quanta per hour, we know that's the quanta, the viral shed that occurred from previous super spreader events in music. And so we put out 48 quanta per hour. That's how much virus this person number 1 is shedding. We look at it in a vocal classroom. The spaghetti noodle model we have up here tracks every air particle that's floating around the room. So this model takes about a month to generate. And then we wanted to see a lot of dark blue particles. So if we look at the ISO concentration cloud to make it a little visually easier, everyone in this cloud has about a 40% chance of contracting COVID-19 if this person number 1 here is contagious. If you look in the green cloud, we're up to 50 to 60%, the yellow cloud's up to 70% of a risk. Now, by adding the mask to all the other things in here, so this room already has increased ventilation because they mechanically increased the air ventilation. Everyone's already standing 6 feet apart. We're assuming they've all washed their hands. So the only thing we're doing now is strapping a mask onto everybody. And you'll see that nobody is in this ISO concentration cloud anymore. So if we look at this, we've reduced the person number 2, this person who's standing next to our infected person, we've reduced their risk of contracting the virus by 85%, which is huge, right? With all the mitigation factors in play. So this is a really important thing to really look at, like, okay, so these mitigations do work. If we look at CLARINET, there's a fluid dynamic component in effect here, right? So when you sing, you're going out at a plane that's going out and spreading across the room. When you're looking at CLARINET, fluid dynamics is pushing it down a tube and then going towards the floor. So you just have a different model that's happening. However, when we look at this model exactly happened in a real life situation between the time we started running this model and the time we got the results. Turns out that both this result of the model and the results in real life were identical, which is really interesting. The only thing that was different was there's one additional person in the real life example than in this model. But you'll see here, like when we add the bell cover and the slitted mask, our results, our aerosol really stays really close to the instrumentalist, which is really important to see. All right, so what we're really looking at here is the 5 principal recommendations. So masking the students, masking the instruments, and making sure the materials we use are the right kind of materials. Making sure that we have things that fit properly. If you go to our second aerosol result release on the website, you'll see how we talk about mask fit and how all that works. Making sure we're sticking with the 6-foot CDC guidance as far as distancing. It applies both indoors and outdoors. And then a little bit of extra space for the trombone. We have a 30-minute time limit here that we want to look at. Now, you'll see these models we put in. These were models after 1 hour. So you see these are all 60-minute models. So for an example, in the singing one, this ISO concentration cloud, after an hour with a mask, this is how big this is. If we were to do 30 minutes, this entire cloud would be the size of this yellow bubble here. Okay, so that's the difference between 30 minutes and 60 minutes. So in the abundance of caution, that's why we're going 30 minutes, because this small little bubble is much better than even just trying to maintain this big guy here, even though it's half the size of the non-masked ISO concentration surface. Oops. And then we also want to, between rehearsals, want to clear the room and then have a minimum of 1 air change rate before we have the next rehearsal period. 3 is better, but we want a minimum of 1. Airflow, outdoor air is best. So if you can allow more outdoor air to come into your room through your HVAC system, that's great. If you can be outdoors, that's great as well. Although I do know it gets cold in February in Vermont. So you can only allow so much outdoor air to come into the building before you start having freezing pipe issues. So in order to change some of that, if you can increase the amount of air change rates per hour mechanically through your space, that's great. The more you can crank into, the better. If you can add HEPA air cleaners to your space, that also works well. For example, my wife is a middle school math teacher, and we put 2 HEPA air cleaners in her room, and we were able to speed the ACH up from 3 to 11 by using those HEPA air cleaners. And then, like I said, just if you can increase the ACH rates, that'd be great. And then because the other thing too is our original guidance had 20 minutes between rehearsals, and that's pretty arbitrary because if your air change rate per hour is 1 per hour, it's going to take a whole hour to get there. If your ACH rate is like 11, it's only going to take you 5 or 6 minutes to have an air change rate, right? So we want to make sure that it's mechanically based instead of just on an arbitrary time. And again, hygiene is important, so don't have unmitigated release of the spit valves. That fluid will contain the COVID-19 virus if you have an infected person there. So the puppy pad thing or other collection device where it's a controlled release, the spit valve would be great. If you weren't a good hand washer pre-pandemic, we really hope you're a good hand washer during the pandemic and that habit continues when we get to the post-pandemic. All that said, just wash your hands and wash your hands often with soap. And then storage areas, we're talking high touch areas should use disinfectant wipes. So doorknobs, storage areas that have lots of people coming through them, we want to make sure those are disinfected. Do you need to mass spray disinfectant in your storage room every day? Probably not. Those recommendations really came from when we thought that we had a fomite transmission issue with the disease. Fomite is surface contact touch transmission. It is an airborne virus, and so we have less concern now of fomite transmission. However, it doesn't mean that we have no fomite transmission. So it is important to disinfect those high touch areas, but you don't necessarily need to go crazy and disinfect everything 1,000 times a day. So with that, open to any questions, and I'm excited to see what questions you guys have.
Outstanding. So there's several that I've transcribed down already, and then we'll go into the chat here. So are you aware of, if we can figure out the air exchange in our rate, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, because I bet there's a lot of questions about that from folks. Mm-hmm. If we can figure out that we have 10 air exchanges per hour, is there a calculator that we can check out online that would say, this is how long you need to be outside of your room for things?
Yeah, so actually the easy calculation for that, if you know you have 10 air change rates per hour, you just go to your calculator and divide 60 divided by 10. And then that's how many minutes you have. So if you have 10 air change rates per hour, it's going to take you 6 minutes to get an air change rate.
Got it. So that's going to be different for everybody once they figure that out. Right. Could you talk specifically about your recommendations for making masks and what material? You chatted with us a little bit about that, just about how tight the slit needs to be around the mouthpiece, et cetera.
So if you use, the reason why we have the slitted mask recommendation for woodwind and brass players is because the embouchure is not necessarily always sealed properly, especially in your beginner players. Also, we have found that as you play longer, you start producing more aerosol around your mouth, and we don't know exactly why that is. Could be a whole host of reasons why. But we tested this surgical style mask, and we want to make sure the slit is as small as it can be and still allow the mouthpiece or the reed to make contact with your embouchure. I see pictures of people using look, I have the slitted mask, and it's split from like cheek to cheek and is 3 inches wide. I'm like, that's really not the point of the slitted mask. That's not what this is designed for. It's designed to have the smallest hole possible. And so they do have manufactured masks on there now. They have like little flaps that are magnetically sealed to each other on the mask. Those are great if you want to buy money for them. But these things work, according to our study so far, work pretty well to keep those aperture area aerosols under control. Smaller slit, the better.
Okay, so a couple more here. There's a lot of questions coming in the chat. That's fantastic. There was the question Jim Clayback had about asking whether or not furniture in the classroom should be covered when it's not in use. That was a question. I think a couple other people had that same one brought to them by their nurse's attention. Could you answer to that?
Yeah, that's a new one for me. I get a lot of the same questions all over the country, but that's a new one. So I'm confused as to why we would need to disinfect unused furniture and equipment, right? So if it's not being used or touched, and you want to make sure nobody uses or touches it, if you throw a tarp over it, should be good to go. Most of the at the beginning, they did a study to find out how long the virus lasts on surfaces. So your non-porous surfaces, it lasts a lot longer. So we're talking your stainless steels and those kinds of surfaces, it lasts a lot longer. But your more porous surfaces, it lasts less time. So on wood, it lasts less time. On clothing, it lasts less time, a lot less because it's porous. It's very fragile to air. So that way, so what you do with masking, right? If you have a cloth mask that you wear every day, the recommendation is you have 7 paper bags, and then you mark them Monday through Sunday, and then you put your mask in there, and then you just rotate through your masks. The reason why is that in that paper bag, the air is going to go through, and you'll basically air disinfect that mask as you go through your week. And it takes about 7 days for it to completely die on fabric, and you come back around to it. So yeah, if you just want to cover up your furniture, I would assume that would be just fine. And then when you uncover it, spray down your tarp and with Lysol, and away you go. Lysol does kill the coronavirus.
But that's not necessarily even a recommendation that you have for covering furniture. Right?
No.
Speaking of bags, this different type of bags, you've said that the instrument bags that are those are the standard in Maine. We know that now, but those are just not worth the bother for us to.
No, we actually, we have the APS data that shows that there's a minimal amount of coming out of there, and you have your hands and fingers. There's so many variables to those keyholes that the amount of aerosol you'd be stopping in the bag is just not worth the bag, right? Also, we don't know what happens when you open that bag up. Like if you're just using that bag and all it's doing is collecting the entire instrument's amounts of aerosols, you eventually have to take your hands out and your instrument out of that bag. And we simply don't know what happens when you open that bag up. Because we haven't studied the bag, we found that there's not enough aerosol to even worry about the bag through the keyholes. So the bell cover takes care of a vast majority of aerosols coming out of that instrument.
Great. A couple things about brass buddies, just as a clarification. Tupperware, that's about a sandwich size with a sponge that the kids keep in their case. And when they're expelling the water out of a brass instrument, it's like shake it out, not blow it out, or pour it out of take the mouthpiece off and pour it in. Is that your recommendation for those?
Yep.
Okay. And then
what you don't want is just, wild spray going out. The days of emptying the water key on the floor, just willy-nilly, should probably be over, and probably for good reason, for lots of reasons, but just throwing it out there.
Straight rows for we've heard this about like not having curved rows for singers. I've never really heard about not having curved rows for instrumentalists. Are either of those necessary?
Yeah, you should at the moment, for a couple of reasons. One, straight rows are easy to measure 6x6 distancing. If you're using a curved row, you're actually going to lose a lot of space that you could have students there for because of the curved design and how the 6x6 distancing would change. So you should do straight rows at the moment. Plus, it makes sure that the aerosol being expelled out doesn't pool up in one central area. I don't know if I'd want to be a band director having a curved row set up and standing in the middle of that at the moment.
Okay, so let me get to some questions in the chat, and then we're going to have Nick talk about some of these are about particular airflow recommendations, and so I'm going to skip over those and just get to some of the stuff that was more about this presentation. there's a lot of questions I know that the general music community has here in Vermont, and how difficult this is to use because they're moving from classroom to classroom. And so I'm not sure that there's an easy answer for how this or if this guidance will work. But Megan asked, as far as elementary general music goes, during a 45-minute class period, can we practice a song for 5 or 10 minutes only, and then have the next class sing for 5 minutes during their class as well? Do they have to have singer masks to do this? Of course, we know that they don't need singer masks, but ideally would have the blue surgical masks, right? Can you speak to the rest of that question? Sort of.
Yeah, so if you're talking like if you're a music on a cart, teacher on a cart scenario, that's what we're talking about. It really is difficult, right? And I'm just going to lay it out there. I used to be a performing arts curriculum coordinator for a district of 25,000 students. I know the hardships it takes to be one of those teachers that has to go into each individual classrooms in a normal setting. That's not ideal. In this case, we have a lot of other issues to take into account. One, well, lots of things you can't control. You don't know for sure that they haven't been moving around. You can control that they're all going to wear masks, and I would recommend that everyone in there wear masks. Hopefully, everyone's 6 feet apart. However, if your school is not mandating 6 feet apart and they're doing something like 3 feet or 4 feet, that is a situation in which you are in. So you should still teach music education based on your school's policies. However, you also have to make sure that you've had a conversation with your administration to say, hey, when I teach music, we're going to be doing aerosolization activities. Is there a way that we can change some of the configuration of the space here to give more kids to spread out? However, in an elementary classroom, I'd be hard pressed to hear that they never talk or sing or do call and response things in a math or in their math lesson or their language arts lessons, right? I have a 2nd grade daughter. They do that stuff all day long in their classroom. So there's some of that stuff we need to take into account as far as what the practicalities are of what they're doing in the classroom and how that may or may not be different than what you're going to do in your music lesson. So just a couple things to think about with that. As far as the time goes, we really don't want to see huge amounts of time being put into singing or playing of instruments. I do want to see that. Let me preface that. But what we don't, as far as aerosol goes, we don't want to see huge amounts of time. But there is a difference between a 5-minute call and response thing and a 30-minute choral rehearsal, right? I think we need to keep that in perspective. So I think what the best thing to do is maybe have a good conversation with your principal and your school nurse. Say, hey, here's my plan to go through my art and my music on a cart lessons, and just make sure that they're good with that, and say, this is what the aerosol stuff that I know. This is the my plan, and make sure everyone kind of signs off on that. And the reason I'd say that is just that way everyone understands that you're doing your best, just like the school in theory should be doing their best during regular classroom instruction. Because that's really where you're going to be placed in that risk assessment, is what's happening in the overall capacity of that day in that one classroom. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think it answers maybe several of these questions in here. And if we sort of skip over any, I'm just trying to consolidate what I think has been answered by what I'm seeing here. So please let me know if Richard Sherman, if that answered your question. I think Robert Flahive, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. I think we answered the question about recorders being the same as flutes. I'm assuming that recorders would want to have a bell cover on them as well.
Yeah, they should have a
surgical mask that's cut and rubber banded on.
Yeah, you can do that. Actually, because there's no aerosolization there, really just a simple cloth covering at the end will work for the recorder, because that's what we recommend for the flute. You're trying to catch the large particles at that point. There's no real aerosol to catch.
Fran Marino asked an interesting question. Is there any indication that elementary students expel less aerosol when they're singing, since they tend not to fully project and breathe in the way an older high school student might?
So interesting enough, so we don't know that. That's still to be studied. We do know that the CDC has said that younger children don't shed the virus at the same rate, the same quanta per hour as when an infected adolescent or adult would. So in that case, the other thing that is interesting too is that there's this theory out there. Now, this is just a theory, so you can take this as for what it's worth. But the height differential between elementary kids and adults also creates a mitigation effect, because you're not having them kind of at your face level projecting. Just a theory, but the elementary component is something that needs to be studied wide and vast, because we just don't know enough. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Question, can we use N95s in choral and instrumental settings?
Yeah, if you have access to them, that'd be amazing. I know in most states, though, they reserve the purchase of N95 masks for medical professionals. There is a Chinese standard equivalent called the KN95 mask or the KN94 mask. Both of those do about the same thing. They're easier to get because U.S. hospitals want the N95 standard, which is a US only standard, and it's a super high standard. So that's why medical people are getting those. But if you use a KN95 or a KN94, feel free to use those. Those are highly effective masks, and they fit much better than the blue surgical masks.
Question about how often we should clean bell covers. Are those okay just to sort of leave on for the duration? And then obviously masks, do we use a new slitted mask every rehearsal?
Yeah, so you can reuse the slitted mask after you let it have a rest period for a couple of days. You can also, on the bell covers, follow the manufacturer's recommendations. From what I'm reading, most manufacturers recommend that you wash the bell cover once a week. And then, so that'd be great, right? Take it home, wash it, bring it back, put it on Monday, away you go. Just don't let them forget them. And then the MERV 13 material inside, most manufacturers are saying recommended they replace that about once a month or so.
Great. I think we answered that the blue face mask can be attached tightly to with a rubber band at the end of a bell as a good way to go. Hillary has a good point.
Really effective bell cover.
Yeah, and I've heard this from other folks as well, that the flute is really hard to play with a mask on. Have you come across any interesting workarounds on that?
No.
Okay.
I have no good answers for that, and I apologize. We're just trying to find something to stop the large droplets for the flute, and nothing really seemed effective enough except for playing behind that blue surgical mask. I get it for beginners, it's going to be really hard. For your more advanced players, they'll have an easier time at it because they understand how the things work a little bit better. But we just haven't figured out another way to mitigate those larger droplets coming off the flute, because you guys blow them so far. Flautists out there, congratulations. But we recorded a couple of flautists being able to blow out a candle from almost 2 feet away. And so with that amount of airstream going in 2 different directions out of the flute, nothing has been as effective as that blue surgical mask.
Lizzie, your question about being able to do music in the student's class, for the classroom that the student stays in, I suppose has an awful lot to do with if air exchange can happen after music is made and people can leave the room. I'm guessing, unless there's more clarification you want, feel free to unmute and ask on that. That's a hard answer on that one. I'm not really sure what to say. Do students need to wear slit masks and instrument covers if playing 6 to 9 feet apart outdoors?
So the masking outdoors becomes a recommendation. So when we're saying indoor masking, we can't say it's required, but basically you should not do something without a mask indoors. Like, we should be there. But if you're outdoors and you're 6 feet away, then it becomes just a recommendation to use the mask. So it's not nearly as hard and fast, because the outdoor air environment is so much safer than the indoor air environment. No matter how clean your indoor air is, outdoors is always best. So then, yeah, the mask recommendation becomes a recommendation, but the spacing has to stay there.
Great. Let me just ask a couple more here so that we can get to the facility question, because I think that's probably a fairly big one. We may have some questions as well. Yes, Danielle, we want to put a mask at the end of the flute still, correct? Cover. The black slit masks from Ellis, Sarah, I think those would probably be great for outside, but I think what we really want to see everybody using are the surgical masks indoors. So the good news is that those masks can get used, but the replacement that you'd have for the kids are the really cheap masks right now. So,
and Eric, if I can, another good thing to remember on the slit mask is that should be for performance only. So you should have your standard mask that you're wearing in the hallways just looped around your ear, the students should. And then so when they stop playing, they're pulling that mask around so they have a complete mask. Because we want that small slit to be completed by the mouthpiece or the reed. And then we want that, if they're not having that instrument in the slit, we want them to be wearing a normal mask that just hangs in the ear. They can pull back over when they're not playing.
Fantastic. And then Carly, to answer your question, what we can now do, and I guess it's going to vary from district to district depending on what your administration says, is what we've presented in this that document that I covered earlier, which we'll have on the website. I'm not sure it's on the website yet. I think it is. If James is here, he can answer that, the webmaster. Yes, and yes, sir, a blue surgical mask with a slit cut in it. So Nick, would you be willing to, it is on the website, fantastic. So there's the information as to what we can do. And Nick is gonna speak a little bit about the journey he went through to get the air checked in his room and maybe answer some of those questions that I skipped over earlier.
Hey guys, so like Eric said, my name's Nick and I'm in Eric's district at St. Albans Town. And I've been doing for a short time some very small instrumental groups in a very large room, lesson groups in a very large room. And this is just the questions that I kind of went through. And we've made another document so that you can bring this to your admin. Questions to ask your facilities managers is your rehearsal space on its own HVAC system or is it a wing-based HVAC system? So personally at our school in St. Albans, I'm in what's a converted meeting room that's supposed to fit an entire grade level worth of students. So I have a dedicated HVAC system in my room that you would most likely find in gyms, libraries, theaters, other large gathering spaces. And then one wing of our school is a wing-based HVAC system. So that means that fresh air is being pulled in from the outside. And they can still figure out how effective your room is at ventilating that air with those wing-based HVAC systems. But if you take a look down below, I know a lot of schools in Vermont, including the school I used to teach at, have these large vent systems in the room. And those, if your ventilation unit looks like this in your classroom, you should consider strongly finding another space to conduct rehearsal. These units recycle air. They do not bring new outside air in. Specifically, once again, talking from our situation, our chorus teacher's room is in the oldest wing of our school. And so we're looking at the schedule of our two largest rooms with better air circulation to get chorus back in the schedule and moving some stuff around. And then finally, guidance from NFHS for ventilation is rated in ACH, which is air changes per hour. If you have a smaller classroom, that's probably what your facilities manager, what you're going to look for. Myself in a larger area, we worked with cubic feet per minute, and it's possible that they may have other units, but please reach out to VMEA. You can send myself, and I'll put my email in the chat if you have further questions on whether or not your room meets NFHS ventilation requirements. And sorry, I'm on the wrong screen, so, oh. Oh, what happened? Did it kick me out?
You're still there, Nick.
We can still hear you.
Okay. All right. So, and then other considerations. So, rehearsals can only be 30 minutes in length, and you should let your room make a complete air exchange before the next group. And one thing that we really had to look at this school was, does your room / schedule allow for this? I have a really great HVAC system in my room, so I've been able to meet that, and I have a great schedule that's allowed me for that. So that's one thing to consider with your admin. Students have to be spread out in a 6x6 manner with 9x6 for trombones. Can you keep these distance and have a schedule that allows for that? So not trying to square peg, round hole your situation into what's happening. And then students need to have proper PPE before playing. PPE might be covered under COVID relief funds. I know a lot of budgets have been currently frozen, but all the PPE that I've purchased here have all been not taken out of my budget, but rather the state relief, the national relief from that. And then finally, musicians should be set up in a straight line, not curved, which we've already kind of gone over today. And the last thing that I kind of want to do is that I've created a Google Drive folder that has the COVID music guidelines and the classroom ventilation documents in it. And I'm going to pop that in, a link to that so that everybody can have access to those two documents. Peter, you have a really, knowing your schedule at North Country Junior High or the basics of it, I would start with your 15 minutes of if you have a 45-minute slot with kids, start with the 15 minutes of non-instrument playing, and then move to the 30 and let the kids go. That's what I've adopted. My 6th grade slot is 45 minutes. So that's what I've moved to them.
Couple questions. So Nick answered where the ventilation dock is going to go. Sarah, yes, I think we need to get with our facilities managers. What my fellow here at BFA is going to do is hire somebody to come in with an instrument that measures the room air exchange. He said it's like $1,000 for this guy to come in and measure the music wing. Other people with more updated systems have that information on hand all the time. So that's a question to involve your principal and your facilities manager for your school with. Gail Kokeli asks, should students and teachers change masks before they leave their rehearsal, or can we continue to wear the same masks all day? Any thoughts on that?
Well, you have a specific playing mask. So your playing mask, my students take off their playing mask, it goes in their case, and then they have a mask for the rest of the day, because you're in the NFHS guidance, you can't wear the same mask. It's recommended not to wear the same mask.
Exactly. Yeah, that performance mask is for performance time only and not to be used outside of that specific usage.
Real quick, James, when temperatures warm up, we have a fan blowing air. We have 2 windows in our music room. We have a fan blowing air out and a fan blowing air in. Is that advisable?
Yeah, that'd be a good thing to do. We're running some tests on that for warm air return. But right now it's looking like in and out. What you don't want to do is just have only air coming in, because then it has no way to evacuate the air that's already been breathed upon. So you want to make sure that rotation is definitely happening.
Great. And then Kyle Anderson is here from the AOE. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you for reminding us that although last week on Friday, we were told this would be put on, that this would be published officially soon. It's not on the AOE site yet, but this is just Monday. So it was kind of sort of sounding like this would be coming out this week from the AOE, but I think it's important that we understand that we're doing this so soon to get people ready, because you're going to need to find out a lot of information and get MERV 13 covers and slitted face masks and what's your air exchange, etc. But that that this is not officially time to do this just yet. So you want to keep your eye on the AOE website to know when that's going to happen. I think we're probably ready to have Molly speak about the advocacy piece next. Is there any, I'm sorry if I missed any questions. Is anybody wants to just simply unmute and ask a question that I didn't get to here? If not, we'll move on.
Eric, my facilities manager got a little crazy when I asked him about the air exchange rates, because he said, don't you know it depends on how many people are in it? And I said, I think we're just talking about for when the room is empty. Is that right, James?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
So for the air exchange rate, we're talking about the room in its empty state rather than in an occupied state.
You got it.
Yep.
Yep. And then also, Eric, if I can, so Peter had asked if they can use the overlapping slip mask that they've already procured. So you can. The reason why we recommend the big thing is the bell cover for sure has to have that MERV 13 material on it. A lot of those those overlapping masks are like 3 or 4 layers of material thick. And so some of them are made of this. So depending on what you have, we're not telling you have to ditch those and go with something different. We just know like this is easy to use and cheap to get. And so that's really what we're looking at there, right? So if you've already purchased the overlapping masks that create a tighter seal around that mouthpiece or reed, you can go ahead and use those. Just know, like we have only studied this for the level of efficacy that we can guarantee. guarantee, right? So so if you've already purchased them, go ahead and use those. If you haven't purchased any, these are easy and cheap to get and easy to use. Hopefully that clarifies that a little bit.
Thank you for saying that, because several people had asked that question.
Yeah.
I'd like to turn this over now to
Eric, I'm sorry. I got a quick question.
Sure.
I had typed this in the chat. I'm sorry I was late. I had an all-state audition private lesson before I got here. Am I hearing correctly that we can sing indoors so long as where the students are standing or sitting is 6 feet apart in every direction with masks on, less than a half an hour? Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And just so you know, Steve, we'll be sending out this recording of the whole Zoom, so you can check out the beginning too, where a lot of those questions were answered. If that would be
Perfect. Thank
helpful. Yeah, no problem. No, thanks for asking that question. I'm sorry I missed you in the chat earlier. I meant to ask that.
That's all right.
Okay, so let's go with, well, actually, Mason just asked one. If we have Eric's recycling units in our rooms, will windows open be advised?
So that's a question I need to go back to our research team and ask that question, because air recycling units they're different than what an HVAC system can do in a room, right? So all of our guidance goes with HVAC systems. So let me go back and ask our research team to see what their thoughts are on air recyclers, and I'll get that information back to Eric and the team.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'd like to introduce Molly Tobin, who is advocacy whiz, and I think we're all going to lean on her. Molly wants to present to everybody, and let me I just can't say this well enough. I'm sure she'll say it, but this was the easy part of what we had to do. We had a laser focus on we wanted the NFHS guidance to be adopted by the state, and we got that. What's coming up next is far more important and far more huge for all of us. So please consider being involved, and so Molly, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm really thinking about 5 specific ways in which for our path forward for immediate advocacy efforts now that we have the guidance change. So number 1, being at the state level and local level is just a public relations campaign as to why music education is so important in our students' lives. We all know those reasons, from brain development to social emotional learning to the career opportunities that music provides for our students, but we need to be really loud about talking about those things on a regular basis. So I will say that I did put together a Google slide presentation for use at school board meetings specifically, or for the meeting with your administration. I'm going to be doing some final tweaks on that, and then hopefully get that up on the website for all of you guys to use. It's going to be editable, so if you guys want to switch some things around or add some things to make it more personal for you, please do that, and use that as a resource as you're talking to your admin and your school boards in the next couple of weeks and months. I'm looking at doing pushing out a social media campaign around Music in Our Schools month. So that's coming up in March, a great opportunity to just get the word out as to what's happening in your programs and what your students are doing. We're talking about a virtual Hill Day coming up here in the spring. So I'm really encouraging you guys. There's going to be information coming out in ways that you can participate in that effort as well. I would really love to hear from all of you guys really specifically about the advocacy needs that are specific to you in your individual schools. So I'm looking to set up maybe some town hall meetings by district. So say we'll have a night for District 1 teachers to meet, and all the way through our District 6, so that I can really, and so that our team can have a really good sense of what's happening in your area and how we can best really target the needs on the ground where you are. So please be looking for information about that, and please consider joining us for those. Thinking about coalition building with the arts organizations in our state. We have amazing arts organizations here that I would love to see VMEA partnering with in a more public way. So including the National Association for Music Merchants, Ellis, and music and arts, and performing arts venues and organizations from Northern Stage to Catamount Arts here in the Kingdom, music businesses, as I said before, and trying to bring them together. I have a document that is in process called Music Education is Essential, that's going to be modeled on the Arts Education is Essential document that was released from NAFME with like 100 endorsing organizations. I'd like to put that together for the state of Vermont and reach out to get some as many organizations to endorse that language as possible. So that is hopefully coming out very soon. We need to continue to think about outreach to our state legislators. So again, Hill Day being a great opportunity to capture the attention of the folks in Montpelier before they adjourn for the legislative session. So we're figuring out, again, the best date for that. So that information will be coming out soon. And I'm hoping also to see someone on the team be in charge of things like budgets and thinking about how to, at the state level, think about budget allocation statewide. And also thinking about Title I and Title IV opportunities in terms of funding for your individual schools, and also perhaps partnering with general education advocates and thinking about things like HVAC upgrades statewide, and also technology, money for technology for our kids, and programs in professional development. So those are 5 ways that I feel like we can really ride the momentum, right? We have the attention of the state right now as to why this is important. They agree on some level, obviously, that music education is really important in the lives of our students. In fact, the one most encouraging thing that I heard in the meeting on Tuesday was when Secretary French acknowledged the needs of our students on the social emotional level, and how music really speaks to that and supports that. So again, we sort of have this momentum behind us. We've been really vocal and really visual as we've been trying to get these guidelines changed. So I'm really hoping that we can capitalize on that and can just continue to push for expanding music education in our students' lives. So please be on the lookout for more information coming out from VMEA and ways that we can all work together on advocacy initiatives. And as ever, please reach out anytime with your own individual needs and concerns, and we'll do our very best to address them as they come up.
Thank you, Molly. And James shared with us earlier that the NFHS is provided quite an extensive document on advocacy post pandemic as well. So we have that to work with as well. Bill, you'll send out this recording to everybody here shortly after, and we'll also look for the constant contact. If you don't have that, send an email to Gary Moreau or any one of us, and we'll make sure that you get on that list so that you can get updates, and we'll have information about advocacy on that same, out to you the same way. I'd like to take just to thank everybody on the advocacy team that we've been working with, Bill and Molly and Steph Wiggin, and Andrea Nardone and Dan Johnston and Nick Allen and Steve Rice and oh my goodness, there was a whole bunch of folks that were on it before I even started in November, and they just really, it's always been nice teamwork to put it together. And I want to thank James Weaver for his time. He's been really dedicated to us in Vermont, and it's really helped so much. Thank you, James. So with that, I will say, have a terrific rest of your week and a great break. And please reach out to us if you have any questions as to how we can support you as you try to navigate these changes and going forward. So thank you, everybody.